My name is Jerry, and I am 26 years old. I never thought my own stepfather would beat me, until my face was bruised and my shoulder dislocated, all because I refused to co-sign his predatory loans. The worst part was not the physical pain, but hearing my mother say, "You brought this on yourself." What happened after I crawled to my brother's door and collapsed even shocked the police officers who arrived at the scene. If you are watching this video, please let me know where you are viewing from. In the comments, hit the like button and subscribe to hear stories of survival and healing. Your support means everything to those of us sharing our darkest moments. I grew up in a small suburb outside of Denver, Colorado. For the first 12 years of my life, things were relatively normal. My parents, Olivia and David, had what I thought was a happy marriage. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house with a backyard where our golden retriever Bailey would chase squirrels in the summer. My older brother Michael was 4 years older than me, and we were close despite the typical sibling rivalries. We would build forts in the living room on rainy days and ride our bikes to the corner store for ice cream when the weather was nice. Everything changed when I was 12. I came home from school one day to find my mother sitting at the kitchen table, eyes red from crying. She told me that she and my father were getting a divorce. Apparently, they had been having problems for years, but had hidden them well from Michael and me. My father had been offered a job in Seattle, and rather than trying to make a long-distance relationship work, they decided to end their marriage. The divorce was messy. My father moved across the country, and while he called regularly at first, the calls became less frequent as he built a new life 3,000 miles away. My mother got primary custody, and we stayed in our family home, though it felt emptier without my father there. Mom had to pick up extra shifts as a nurse to make ends meet, which meant Michael and I were often left to fend for ourselves. I grew up quickly during those years, learning to cook simple meals and help with household chores. 3 years after the divorce, when I was 15, my mother met Frank Williams at the hospital where she worked. He was a pharmaceutical sales representative who visited the hospital regularly. Frank was tall with salt and pepper hair and a charming smile. He would bring my mother coffee during her breaks and leave notes on her windshield. After 6 months of dating, he proposed, and they were married in a small ceremony at City Hall. At first, Frank seemed like the perfect stepfather. He took an interest in my schoolwork and came to my volleyball games. He bought Michael a new laptop for college and helped him move into his dorm. Frank had a good job and eased the financial burden on my mother, allowing her to cut back on her hours at the hospital. For the first time since the divorce, she seemed happy. But there were subtle warning signs that I was too young to recognize. Frank always needed to know where everyone was and what they were doing. He insisted on having access to my mother's bank accounts and credit cards. He would make jokes about how women were not good with money and needed a man to take care of the finances. When I got my first part-time job at 16, he suggested I give him a portion of my paycheck so he could invest it for me. My mother laughed it off, saying he was just trying to help. As I got older, I became more aware of these controlling behaviors. Frank would criticize my mother for spending money on new clothes or getting her hair done. He monitored the grocery bills and questioned every purchase. If my mother bought something without telling him, it would lead to days of tension in the house. Yet he thought nothing of buying himself expensive golf clubs or taking clients out for lavish dinners. Despite this, I focused on my education. I had always been good with numbers and decided to pursue a degree in accounting. I worked part-time throughout college to minimize student loans and graduated with honors. By 24, I had secured a position at a respected accounting firm in Denver and had my own apartment about 20 minutes from my mother and Frank's house. Michael had also done well for himself After college, he had gotten a job as a software engineer and lived in an apartment complex about 15 minutes away from our mother's house. We would meet for coffee every Sunday and catch up on each other's lives. Michael had never particularly liked Frank, but for our mother's sake, he remained civil. Over the years, Frank's behavior had become more erratic. He would have bursts of extravagant spending followed by periods of extreme frugality. My mother seemed constantly stressed but would brush off my concerns whenever I asked if everything was okay. "Marriage has its ups and downs," she would say. "Frank takes good care of us." What I did not know then was that Frank had a history of financial problems. He had filed for bankruptcy 5 years before meeting my mother, something he had never disclosed to her. He had also been fired from his previous job for irregularities in his expense reports. His charming facade had hidden a pattern of financial irresponsibility that would eventually tear our family apart. In the months leading up to what I now call the incident, there had been an increasing tension in the household. Frank would snap at minor inconveniences, and my mother walked on eggshells around him. I noticed she had stopped inviting me over for dinner as often, and when I did visit, Frank would find excuses to be out of the house. Little did I know that his financial house of cards was on the verge of collapse, and he had already identified me as the solution to his problems. 6 months before the assault that would change everything, Frank lost his job. The pharmaceutical company he worked for was downsizing, and his entire division was eliminated. At first, he was confident about finding a new position quickly. "With my experience and connections, I will have offers rolling in within weeks," he assured my mother and me over dinner the night he was let go. But weeks turned into months, and those promised job offers never materialized. I later learned that Frank had been exaggerating his sales numbers for years, and his former employer had given him a choice: resign quietly or be fired for falsifying reports. This meant he could not get a reference from his previous job, making it nearly impossible to find a similar position in the industry. As his unemployment stretched on, the financial strain on the household intensified. My mother picked up extra shifts at the hospital, often working 16-hour days. She would come home, exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, only to find Frank on the couch watching television. "I applied for 3 jobs today," he would say, defensively before she could even ask. Frank began drinking heavily. What started as a glass of whiskey in the evening became half a bottle, then a full bottle. His personality changed when he drank. The charming, confident man was replaced by someone bitter and resentful. He would rant about how the world was against him and how no one appreciated all he had done for the family. Bills started piling up on the kitchen counter. First, it was just the credit card statements, then the utility bills, and finally notices about the mortgage being overdue. My mother tried to shield me from the worst of it, but I could see the worry etched on her face whenever I visited. One Sunday over coffee, Michael expressed his concern. "Have you noticed how thin Mom looks?" And she mentioned they might have to sell the house. "I do not think Frank is being straight with her about their finances." I had noticed, and it troubled me deeply. My mother had always been the strong one, the one who held everything together after my father left. Seeing her so worn down broke my heart. The truth about Frank's financial situation came to light when my mother called me in tears one evening. She had discovered that Frank had filed for bankruptcy 5 years before meeting her. Worse, he had maxed out all their credit cards and taken out a second mortgage on the house without telling her. They were over $100,000 in debt, and the bank was threatening foreclosure. "Why did not you tell me sooner?" I asked, struggling to keep the frustration out of my voice. "I was embarrassed," she admitted. "And Frank kept saying he would fix it. He promised he would find a way." Frank's way of fixing things, it turned out, was to apply for more loans. But with his credit history and current unemployment, no bank would approve him. He tried payday lenders and other high-interest options, but even they turned him down without a cosigner. During my next visit, I found my mother at the kitchen table, surrounded by past due notices. Frank was pacing the living room phone to his ear, arguing with someone about loan terms. When he saw me, he quickly ended the call and forced a smile. "Jerry, just the person I wanted to see," he said, his tone overly cheerful. "Your mother and I were just discussing how we might need a little help from the family to get through this rough patch." My mother looked up, her expression a mixture of hope and shame. "We would not ask if we had any other options," she said softly. I offered to help with some of the utility bills and groceries, though I was still paying off my own student loans, and the rent on my apartment was not cheap. Frank accepted my offer with a nod, but did not seem satisfied. I would soon learn why. Over the next few weeks, Frank became increasingly fixated on my credit score. "You know, as an accountant, you must have excellent credit," he would comment casually. "Banks love young professionals like you." I did have good credit. I had been careful with money my entire life, a trait I had inherited from my father. I paid my bills on time, kept my credit card balances low, and lived within my means. It was a point of pride for me, especially given my chosen profession. Frank began dropping hints about how I could really help the family if I wanted to. My mother would change the subject whenever he brought it up, but I could tell by her expression that they had discussed it when I was not around. The pressure was building, and I could feel myself being pulled into their financial quicksand. I wanted to help my mother, but something about Frank's increasing desperation set off alarm bells in my mind. Little did I know that those instincts would soon save me from financial ruin, though, at a terrible personal cost. The first direct confrontation about the loans happened during a family dinner at their house. Frank had been unusually upbeat that evening, grilling steaks and opening a bottle of wine he had been saving for a special occasion. My mother seemed nervous, playing with her food more than eating it. After dinner, as we sat around the table with coffee, Frank cleared his throat and placed a folder in front of me. "Jerry, we need to discuss something important," he began, his voice serious but controlled. "Your mother and I are in a bit of a financial bind, as you know. We have found a solution, but we need your help." Inside the folder were application papers for a $75,000 personal loan. The terms seemed straightforward at first glance, but when I flipped to the second page, I saw that they were asking me to be the primary applicant with Frank as a cosigner, not the other way around. "With your credit score and income, we will be approved right away," Frank explained. "I will make all the payments, of course. You will not have to worry about a thing." I looked at my mother, who was staring at her coffee cup. "Mom, what do you think about this?" "We would not ask if we were not desperate," she said quietly. "The bank is going to foreclose next month if we cannot come up with the mortgage payments." I felt a knot forming in my stomach. $75,000 was an enormous amount of money, nearly twice my annual salary after taxes. If Frank defaulted on the payments, I would be solely responsible for the debt. "I need to think about this," I said finally. "Can I take these papers home and look them over?" Frank's smile remained fixed, but I caught a flash of annoyance in his eyes. "Of course, take your time. But we do need an answer by the end of the week. The foreclosure process is already underway." My mother walked me to the door when I left. "He is really trying, Jerry," she whispered. "This has been so hard on him, on both of us. We would not ask if there was any other way." Later that week, Frank called me directly, something he rarely did. "Have you had a chance to look over those papers?" he asked, his voice casual but with an underlying tension. "I have. And I have some concerns," I replied. "The interest rate is very high, and the terms seem predatory." That is the best we could get, given our situation, Frank said dismissively. Look, I know it seems like a lot of money, but once I get back on my feet, I will pay it off quickly. You will not have to pay a dime. I had spent the days since the dinner researching the lender Frank had chosen. It was a company known for targeting desperate borrowers with high-interest loans and hidden fees. I had also spoken to my friend Taylor, who worked as a financial advisor, and she had strongly cautioned me against signing anything. I am sorry, Frank, but I cannot do this, I said firmly. There are other options we can explore. Maybe a debt consolidation program or negotiating directly with the mortgage company. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Frank finally spoke, his voice was cold. I thought you cared about your mother. I guess I was wrong. The guilt trip was transparent, but it still stung. I do care about Mom, which is why I do not want to put any of us in an even worse financial situation. These loans are designed to trap people in debt. You do not know what you are talking about, Frank snapped. You think because you have some fancy accounting degree, you understand our situation? You have no idea what we are going through. The conversation ended with Frank hanging up on me. I immediately called my mother, but she did not answer. When she finally called back the next day, she sounded tired. Frank is just stressed about the money, she said. Give him time to cool down. But Frank did not cool down. Instead, his behavior escalated. He began calling me repeatedly, sometimes late at night, leaving voicemails about how I was abandoning the family in their time of need. He would show up at my workplace during lunch, trying to corner me into discussions about the loan. During a Sunday visit to their house, things came to a head. Frank had been drinking since morning, and my mother had that familiar look of nervous exhaustion. When I tried to talk to her about getting financial counseling, Frank interrupted. We do not need counseling, he slurred. We need cash. And you, with your perfect credit and your fancy job, you refuse to help. What kind of daughter are you? Frank, that is enough, my mother said weakly. No, it is not enough, he shouted, slamming his glass down so hard that wine splashed onto the table. She lives her comfortable little life while we are about to lose our home. She does not care about us at all. I stood up, shaking with anger and hurt. I have offered to help in ways that would not financially destroy all of us. I have offered to pay bills to help you find resources. But I will not sign a predatory loan that could ruin my financial future. You selfish little Frank began, but my mother cut him off. Please, both of you stop this, she pleaded. We are family. We should not be fighting like this. I left that day with a sick feeling in my stomach. The look in Frank's eyes had frightened me, a cold, calculating anger that went beyond the immediate argument. As I drove home, I called Michael and told him everything. Stay away from the house for a while, he advised. Frank sounds unstable. Mom will come around eventually, but right now she is caught in the middle. I took Michael's advice and limited my contact with them to phone calls over the next few weeks. Frank never answered when I called, and my conversations with my mother were brief and strained. She always insisted that things were fine, but I could hear the tension in her voice. Little did I know that Frank's desperation was reaching a breaking point, and that my refusal to help on his terms had marked me as an enemy in his mind. The confrontation that would change all our lives forever was rapidly approaching. 3 weeks after our heated argument, my mother called and asked if I could come over to help her sort through some old family photos for a project she was working on. Frank will be out golfing with friends all afternoon, she added, as if knowing that would make me more likely to visit. It was a beautiful Saturday in May, sunny but not too hot. I drove to their house with the windows down, thinking that maybe this was my mother's way of extending an olive branch. Perhaps without Frank around, we could have an honest conversation about their financial situation and explore realistic solutions. When I arrived, my mother greeted me with a hug that lasted a little too long, as if she were holding on to me for support. We sat at the dining room table with boxes of old photographs spread out between us. For a while, we reminisced about family vacations and holiday gatherings, the tension of recent weeks temporarily forgotten. "Do you remember this trip to the Grand Canyon?" my mother asked, passing me a faded photograph of a younger version of myself, standing at the canyon rim, my hair blowing in the wind. "Dad was so scared I would fall in." I laughed. He kept grabbing the back of my jacket every time I got within 5 feet of the edge. My mother smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. "He always was protective of you." We worked through the photos for about an hour, sorting them into different piles and placing the best ones in a new album. My mother seemed distracted, checking her phone frequently and glancing at the clock. "Are you expecting someone?" I finally asked. "No, no," she said quickly. "Just making sure we have enough time before Frank gets back. He does not like the house to be messy." I looked around at the immaculate living room and spotless kitchen. The house had always been clean, but now it seemed sterile, as if my mother was afraid to leave any trace of daily life visible. Just as we were finishing up with the photos, we heard the front door open. My mother froze, her eyes widening with an emotion I immediately recognized as fear. Frank stumbled into the dining room, the smell of alcohol preceding him. His golf clothes were rumpled, and his face was flushed. "Well, well," he said, his words slightly slurred. "Look who is here." "Frank, I thought you were golfing until 5, my mother said, her voice unnaturally high. "Game ended early," he muttered, dropping his golf bag with a loud thud. "Some of the guys had to leave." He fixed his gaze on me, his eyes narrowing. "What are you doing here?" Before I could answer, my mother jumped in. "Jerry is helping me with a photo project." "We are almost done," Frank snorted. "A photo project. How nice." Meanwhile, I got another call from the bank today. They are moving forward with the foreclosure. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. I began gathering the remaining photos, sensing that I should leave before things escalated. I should probably get going. "No, no, stay," Frank insisted, his tone making it clear it was not a friendly invitation. "Since you are here, we might as well talk about the elephant in the room." He left the dining room and returned moments later with a familiar folder, slapping it down on the table so hard that several photos fluttered to the floor. "I have the loan papers right here. All they need is your signature, and all our problems go away." My heart began to race, but I kept my voice steady. "Frank, we have already discussed this. I cannot sign those papers. The terms are predatory, and it would put all of us at risk." Risk? Frank laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You want to talk about risk? Your mother and I are about to lose our home. Where is the risk for you? You just sign a piece of paper. A piece of paper that makes me legally responsible for $75,000, I pointed out. "I have offered to help in other ways." Frank's face darkened. "Your pocket change is not going to save our house. We need this loan." My mother placed a hand on Frank's arm. "Maybe we should discuss this another time, when everyone is calmer." Frank shook her off, his attention fixed solely on me. "No, we are settling this today. I am tired of her high and mighty attitude. She thinks she is better than us with her accounting job and her perfect credit score." "That is not true," I protested. "I am just trying to make responsible financial decisions." "Responsible!" Frank roared, slamming his fist on the table. "You call abandoning your family responsible?" I stood up, gathering my purse. "I am not having this conversation while you are drunk, Frank. We can talk when you are sober." As I turned to leave, Frank grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my flesh. "You are not going anywhere until you sign these papers." "Let go of me," I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Frank, please," my mother pleaded. "Let her go." But Frank was beyond reasoning. With his free hand, he shoved the folder at me. "Sign it! Sign it now!" "No," I said firmly, trying to pull away. "I will not sign it." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Frank's face contorted with rage, and before I could react, he shoved me hard. I stumbled backward, my hip hitting the corner of the dining table. The pain was sharp and immediate. "Frank," my mother gasped. But Frank was not done. He advanced on me, his eyes wild with anger. "You ungrateful little brat! After everything we have done for you, you have not done anything for me." I shot back, fear giving way to anger. "You have been bleeding my mother dry for years." That was when Frank snapped completely. He lunged at me, his first blow catching me on the cheekbone with such force that I saw stars. I raised my arms to protect my face, but he kept coming, hitting and shoving me against the wall. I heard my mother screaming in the background, but she made no move to intervene. The assault seemed to go on forever, though it was probably only minutes. When Frank finally stepped back, I was on the floor, my face throbbing, and my left shoulder radiating pain in a way that told me something was seriously wrong. "You are trash," Frank spat down at me. "Go live on the street for all I care." Through swollen eyes, I looked at my mother, standing frozen a few feet away. "Mom, please," I whispered. Instead of helping me, she shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You brought this on yourself, Jerry. If you had just helped us like a daughter, none of this would have happened." Her words hurt more than any of Frank's blows. I struggled to my feet, clutching my injured arm close to my body. Every movement sent waves of agony through my shoulder. Without another word, I staggered to the front door. "If you leave now, do not bother coming back," Frank called after me. "You are no longer welcome in this house." I made it to my car somehow, but quickly realized I could not drive with my injured shoulder. The pain was becoming unbearable, and my vision was blurring at the edges. Michael's apartment was only a few blocks away. If I could just make it there, I would be safe. Leaving my car parked in front of my mother's house, I began the excruciating journey to my brother's place. Each step sent spikes of pain through my body. Blood from a cut above my eye dripped down my face, and I could taste its metallic tang on my lips. The few people I passed on the street averted their eyes, unwilling to get involved. I must have been a frightening sight, stumbling along with a bloody, swollen face and tear-stained cheeks. By the time I reached Michael's apartment building, my strength was failing. I managed to make it to his door and raised my good arm to knock. But the movement caused such intense pain in my injured shoulder that I cried out. The world tilted sideways, and I collapsed consciousness, slipping away as I heard the sound of a door opening and my brother's shocked voice calling my name. I woke up to the rhythmic beeping of hospital monitors and the sterile smell of disinfectant. My body felt heavy, weighed down by pain medication that dulled but did not eliminate the throbbing in my face and shoulder. When I tried to open my eyes, only the right one cooperated. The left was swollen shut. "Jerry, can you hear me? It is Michael." I turned toward my brother's voice, wincing as the movement sent a fresh wave of pain through my shoulder. Michael sat beside the hospital bed, his face drawn with worry and barely contained anger. "What happened?" I croaked, my mouth dry as sandpaper. "You do not remember?" Michael asked, reaching for a cup of water with a straw and holding it to my lips. "You showed up at my door, beaten half to death. You collapsed before you could say anything." As I sipped the water, fragmented memories began flooding back. The photo album. Frank returning home drunk. The loan papers. The first blow to my face. My mother's devastating words. "Frank," I whispered. "He wanted me to sign loan papers." I refused. Michael's jaw tightened. "I called 911 as soon as I found you. The paramedics said your shoulder is dislocated and you have a concussion, not to mention the bruises and cuts all over your face and arms. A nurse entered the room, checking my vitals and adjusting my IV. Good to see you awake, she said kindly. The doctor will be in shortly, and Detective Thompson has been waiting to speak with you when you are up to it. Detective, I asked, confused. Assault is a crime, Jerry Michael explained after the nurse left. When you came in with these kinds of injuries, the hospital was required to notify the police. The reality of the situation began to sink in. This was not just a family dispute anymore, it was a criminal matter. Part of me wanted to minimize what had happened, to protect my mother from the fallout that would surely come. But another part, the part that still felt the sting of her betrayal, wanted justice. Dr. Rivera arrived next, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She examined my injuries, explaining that my shoulder had been relocated but would require physical therapy. The bruising on my face looked worse than it was, but the cut above my eye had needed 5 stitches. I had been lucky, she said, that there was no permanent damage. Lucky did not feel like the right word. Detective Thompson came in after the doctor left. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair and deep lines around his eyes that suggested he had seen too much of humanity's darker side. Miss Carter, I am Detective James Thompson, he introduced himself, pulling up a chair beside my bed. I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions about what happened. With Michael's supportive presence beside me, I recounted the events of the afternoon. Detective Thompson took notes, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly letting me tell the story at my own pace. When I described how my mother had stood by and blamed me for the assault, his expression darkened. And this was all because you would not co-sign a loan, he asked. Yes, I confirmed. Frank has been trying to pressure me for weeks. He and my mother are in financial trouble, and he wanted me to take out a $75,000 loan that he would supposedly pay back. But you did not believe he would pay it back. His credit is destroyed. He has no job, and he has a history of financial irresponsibility that he hid from my mother until recently. So no, I did not believe he would pay it back. Detective Thompson nodded. You made the right call. I have seen too many cases where family members are left with massive debt after situations like this. After taking my full statement, Detective Thompson used his phone to photograph my injuries. We will need these for evidence, he explained. I will be seeking an arrest warrant for Frank Williams on charges of assault and battery. Just as the detective was preparing to leave, there was a commotion in the hallway. My mother's voice carried into the room, high-pitched and frantic. That is my daughter in there. I need to see her. Michael stood up, his body tense. I will handle this, he said, stepping out of the room. I could hear their conversation through the partially open door. How could you let this happen? Michael demanded. You stood there while he beat her, and then you blamed her. You do not understand, my mother protested. Frank has been under so much stress. Jerry pushed him too far, refusing to help when we are about to lose everything. Listen to yourself. Michael's voice rose in disbelief. Your husband put your daughter in the hospital, and you are defending him. Detective Thompson excused himself and stepped into the hallway. Mrs. Williams, I am Detective Thompson. I would like to speak with you about what happened today. Their voices moved further away, and I closed my eye, exhaustion overwhelming me. When I woke again, Michael was back in the chair beside me, and a hospital social worker named Diane was introducing herself. We need to discuss your discharge plan, Diane explained. Given the circumstances, it would not be safe for you to return to your apartment alone, at least initially. Do you have someone you can stay with? She is staying with me, Michael said firmly. I have a spare bedroom, and I work from home most days so I can keep an eye on her." Diane nodded approvingly. "I also want to connect you with some resources." She handed me several pamphlets on domestic violence support groups and counseling services. "What you have experienced is a form of family violence, and it is important that you get support." The thought of being labeled a domestic violence victim made me uncomfortable, but I took the pamphlets anyway. At that moment, a nurse came in with my dinner tray and more pain medication. Detective Thompson arrested Frank Michael, informed me as I picked at the hospital food. "Mom is beside herself. She keeps calling me saying we are tearing the family apart and that we do not understand how desperate their situation is." "Is she still defending him?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Michael's silence confirmed it. I pushed the food tray away, my appetite gone. The pain medication was making me drowsy again, and I found myself drifting off to sleep, grateful for the temporary escape from reality. The next day brought more visitors. My supervisor from work came by assuring me that my job was secure and that I should take all the time I needed to recover. Several friends stopped in with flowers and offers of help. Detective Thompson returned with news that the district attorney was charging Frank with second-degree assault, a felony that could result in prison time. "There is something else you should know," the detective added, his expression grim. "During our investigation, we discovered that Frank has been using your personal information to open credit cards in your name." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. "What? How is that possible?" "Identity theft is unfortunately common in family situations," Detective Thompson explained. "Frank had access to your social security number and other personal information. We found applications for 3 credit cards in your name among his papers, along with statements showing charges of over $20,000. I felt sick. Not only had Frank tried to force me to co-sign a predatory loan, but he had also been stealing my identity. How long had this been going on? How much damage had been done to my credit? "What do?" I asked, feeling overwhelmed. "I will connect you with our financial crimes unit," Detective Thompson assured me. "They can help you report the fraud and begin the process of clearing your credit. In the meantime, you should consider a credit freeze." After the detective left, Michael helped me contact the credit bureaus to place a fraud alert on my credit report. The hospital discharge planner came by to discuss my release the following day, and a physical therapist showed me exercises to begin once the worst of the shoulder pain subsided. Through it all, there was no word from my mother, only messages she left for Michael, alternating between pleading for us to drop the charges and accusing us of abandoning the family in their time of need. Each message reinforced my decision to press charges against Frank, even as it broke my heart to realize how completely he had manipulated my mother. The next day, Michael brought me clothes and helped me dress for discharge. The simple act of putting on a t-shirt was excruciating, even with his help. The doctor prescribed pain medication and provided a referral for outpatient physical therapy. As Michael drove me to his apartment, I stared out the window trying to process everything that had happened. In the span of 24 hours, my life had been completely upended. I had been assaulted by my stepfather, betrayed by my mother, and discovered I was a victim of identity theft. The weight of it all threatened to crush me. "We will get through this," Michael said, as if reading my thoughts. "One day at a time." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. One day at a time was all I could manage right now. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. A meeting with the district attorney, appointments to address the identity theft, and the beginning of a long journey toward both physical and emotional healing. But for today, the simple fact of being safe away from Frank's rage and my mother's devastating betrayal was enough. The weeks following my release from the hospital were a blur of appointments and paperwork. Detective Thompson worked diligently on building the case against Frank, gathering evidence not only of the assault, but also of the identity theft. The Financial Crimes Unit helped me file reports with the credit bureaus and begin the arduous process of disputing the fraudulent charges on the credit cards Frank had opened in my name. Living with Michael was both a blessing and a challenge. His apartment, while spacious enough, had not been designed for someone with limited mobility. Simple tasks like showering or getting dressed required his assistance at first, which was uncomfortable for both of us, despite our close relationship. But Michael never complained, taking time off work to drive me to appointments and making sure I took my medication on schedule. The district attorney wants to meet with us tomorrow. Michael informed me one evening as we ate takeout Chinese food in his living room. I had been out of the hospital for a week, and the bruises on my face had begun to fade from deep purple to a sickly yellow-green. My shoulder still throbbed constantly, despite the pain medication. "What does he want to discuss?" I asked, pushing a piece of broccoli around with my fork. "They are offering Frank a plea deal. 3 years for the assault with an additional 2 for the identity theft, but he would likely serve less with good behavior." The thought of Frank going to prison was surreal. Despite everything he had done, part of me still saw him as my mother's husband, the man who had once helped me move into my college dorm and had taught me to change a flat tire. But that image had been shattered the moment he raised his hand to me. "And if he does not take the deal, then it goes to trial and you would have to testify." The prospect of facing Frank in court, of recounting the assault in front of strangers, made my stomach churn. But I also knew that I could not let him get away with what he had done both to me and potentially to others in the future. "I will testify if I have to," I said finally. "He needs to face consequences for his actions." The next day, we met with District Attorney Samantha Reynolds, a formidable woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She explained the strengths and weaknesses of the case, emphasizing that my testimony would be crucial if Frank decided not to accept the plea deal. "The physical evidence is compelling," DA Reynolds explained, referencing the hospital records and photographs of my injuries. "And we have your brother's statement about your condition when you arrived at his door." But cases like this often come down to the victim's testimony. I flinched at the word victim, still uncomfortable with that label. DA Reynolds noticed and smiled sympathetically. "I know that term can be difficult to hear, Miss Carter, but what happened to you was a crime, and you have nothing to be ashamed of." As we were leaving the district attorney's office, my phone rang. It was my mother for the first time since the assault. After a moment's hesitation, I answered. "Jerry, please do not hang up," she began, her voice thick with tears. "We need to talk." Michael watched me with concern as I agreed to meet my mother at a coffee shop near his apartment the following day. "Are you sure about this?" he asked after I ended the call. "No," I admitted, "but I need to hear what she has to say." The coffee shop was busy when I arrived, which was oddly comforting. The presence of other people made me feel safer, less vulnerable. My mother was already there, sitting at a corner table with a cup of untouched coffee in front of her. She looked terrible, her face gaunt and her hair unwashed. "Thank you for coming," she said, as I sat down across from her. Her eyes widened at the sight of my still bruised face. "Oh, Jerry, your face." "What did you expect?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Frank did not hold back. She flinched. "I know, and I am so sorry. I should have stopped him. I should have done something." "Yes, you should have," I agreed. "But you did not. You stood there and watched him beat me, and then you blamed me for it." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. But you have to understand, Jerry. We are about to lose everything. The bank is foreclosing next week, and we have nowhere to go. That is not my fault, I said firmly, and it does not justify what Frank did to me or the fact that he committed identity theft using my information. My mother's expression changed, a flash of disbelief crossing her face. Identity theft? What are you talking about? I explained about the credit cards Frank had opened in my name, watching as the color drained from her face. I did not know, she whispered. I swear I did not know he would do something like that. Part of me wanted to believe her, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But the memory of her standing by while Frank assaulted me was still too fresh, too painful. Why are you here, Mom? What do you want from me? She reached across the table, trying to take my hand, but I pulled away. I want you to drop the charges against Frank, she said. He made a terrible mistake, but he is not a bad person. He was just desperate. I stared at her in disbelief. Not a bad person. He beat me so badly I needed hospitalization. He stole my identity. And you are still defending him. He is my husband, Jerry. For better or worse, I cannot abandon him now. Like you abandoned me. The words came out before I could stop them, laden with hurt and anger. My mother flinched as if I had struck her. I love you, Jerry. But I love Frank, too. He needs me right now. And I did not need you when I was lying on the floor of your dining room, bleeding and in pain. She had no answer for that. After a moment of heavy silence, I stood up. I am not dropping the charges, Mom. Frank needs to face the consequences of his actions. Then I will testify on his behalf, she said, her voice suddenly hard. I will tell the court that you provoked him, that you have always been difficult and selfish. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. Do what you have to do, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil inside me. But know that if you stand with him against me, we are done. I will not have a relationship with someone who chooses my abuser over me. I left the coffee shop with tears streaming down my face, barely making it back to Michael's apartment before breaking down completely. When I told him about the conversation, his face darkened with anger. She is still under his control, he said. Frank has manipulated her for years, and now she cannot see past his lies. In the days that followed, the family divisions deepened. My mother's sister, Aunt Patricia, called to express her support for me, revealing that she had always had concerns about Frank's controlling behavior. But my mother's brother, Uncle David, sided with her, leaving angry voicemails about how I was destroying the family by pressing charges. Meanwhile, the court proceedings moved forward. Frank initially refused the plea deal, confident that my mother's support would sway a jury in his favor. A preliminary hearing was scheduled, and I spent hours with the district attorney preparing for my testimony. The day before the hearing, everything changed. Detective Thompson called to inform us that Frank had suddenly agreed to the plea deal. What happened? I asked, surprised by the reversal. We found evidence that this was not his first assault, Detective Thompson explained. A former girlfriend came forward after seeing his arrest in the news. She had similar injuries back in 2018, but did not press charges out of fear. When Frank's attorney learned about this, he advised accepting the deal. The revelation that Frank had a history of violence was both validating and deeply disturbing. Had my mother known? Had she ignored warning signs just as she had ignored mine? The next day I sat in the courtroom as Frank formally accepted the plea deal. He looked smaller somehow, his confident demeanor replaced by a sullen resignation. My mother sat behind him, not looking in my direction even once. Before the judge accepted the plea, I was given the opportunity to make a victim impact statement. Standing at the podium, I faced Frank directly for the first time since the assault. The physical injuries are healing. I began, my voice stronger than I expected. The bruises have faded, and with physical therapy, my shoulder will eventually recover. But the emotional damage of being assaulted by someone I trusted, someone who was supposed to be family, will take much longer to heal. I spoke about the fear I now lived with, the nightmares that plagued my sleep, and the betrayal that had shattered my relationship with my mother. What hurts the most is not the violence itself, but the betrayal that came with it. The realization that the people who should have protected me were the ones who caused me harm. When I finished speaking, the courtroom was silent. The judge thanked me for my statement and then addressed Frank directly. "Mr. Williams, your actions were not just a momentary lapse in judgment. They represent a pattern of violence and financial exploitation that cannot be excused by stress or financial difficulty. I accept your guilty plea and sentence you to 5 years in the state penitentiary." As Frank was led away in handcuffs, he did not look back at my mother or at me. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, drawn by the unusual nature of the case. Michael shielded me from their questions, hurrying me to his car. "It is over," he said as we drove away. "He cannot hurt you any more." But it was not truly over. That evening, my mother called one last time. "Frank is going to prison because of you," she said, her voice cold and unfamiliar. "I hope you are satisfied." "He is going to prison because of his own actions," I corrected her, "and because you failed to protect me from him." "I have lost everything," she continued, as if I had not spoken. "The house, my husband, and now my children. I will never forgive you for this, Jerry." The finality in her voice told me that this was goodbye. Despite everything, despite the betrayal, and the hurt tears filled my eyes. "I am sorry you feel that way, Mom. I hope someday you will understand that I did what I had to do." "Goodbye, Jerry," she said, and the line went dead. I sat in Michael's guest room, staring at the phone in my hand, feeling a strange mixture of grief and relief. The mother I had known, the one who had bandaged my skinned knees and stayed up with me when I had nightmares, was gone. In her place was a stranger, someone who had chosen an abusive man over her own daughter. "Are you okay?" Michael asked, appearing in the doorway. "No," I answered honestly, "but I will be, eventually." Physical recovery came faster than emotional healing. 6 weeks of intensive physical therapy restored most of the mobility in my shoulder, though certain movements still caused twinges of pain that the therapist assured me would diminish with time. The bruises faded, the cut above my eye healed to a faint scar, and outwardly I looked like my old self again. Inside, however, I was fundamentally changed. The assault and subsequent betrayal had shaken my sense of security and trust to the core. Nightmares disrupted my sleep, and I found myself jumpy and anxious in crowds or when someone moved too quickly near me. At Michael's insistence, I began seeing a therapist, Lisa Hernandez, who specialized in trauma and family violence. Our weekly sessions became an anchor in the storm of emotions I was navigating. "What you are experiencing is normal," Lisa assured me, during one particularly difficult session when I broke down describing a panic attack I had experienced at work. "Trauma changes the way our brains process threats. Your body is trying to protect you from further harm." With Lisa's guidance, I learned coping strategies for the anxiety and techniques to ground myself when memories of the assault threatened to overwhelm me. Slowly, I began to reclaim control over my life and emotions. 3 months after the assault, I was finally ready to move back into my own apartment. The identity theft had been resolved, with the credit card companies removing the fraudulent charges and the credit bureaus clearing my credit report. The financial damage Frank had attempted to inflict had been repaired, but the emotional wounds ran deeper. "Are you sure you are ready?" Michael asked, as he helped me carry the last of my belongings from his apartment to my car. "You know you can stay as long as you need to." I am sure I said, though, in truth, the thought of living alone again was frightening. I need to do this. I need to prove to myself that I can stand on my own again. My apartment felt both familiar and strange when I returned. I had the locks changed and installed a security system, small measures that helped me feel safer. Friends took turns staying with me the first few nights, a support network that had emerged stronger than ever during my recovery. Taylor, my financial advisor friend who had initially warned me against co-signing Frank's loan, helped me set up a comprehensive financial security plan. We froze my credit, set up fraud alerts, and created a budget that would allow me to rebuild my emergency savings. You dodged a bullet, Taylor said, as we reviewed my newly secured accounts. If you had signed those loan papers, you would be facing financial ruin right now. She was right. Shortly after Frank's sentencing, the bank had foreclosed on my mother's house. I later learned from Aunt Patricia that my mother had moved in with Uncle David, still bitter and blaming me for the loss of everything she had. The knowledge that I had made the right decision financially was cold comfort in the face of losing my relationship with my mother. Some days I would pick up the phone to call her, only to remember that she wanted nothing to do with me. The grief would wash over me anew, and I would have to remind myself that I had not chosen this estrangement. She had. Work became a sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in numbers and spreadsheets that always balanced perfectly, unlike the messy equations of human relationships. My supervisor, understanding the trauma I had experienced, allowed me flexibility in my schedule to accommodate therapy appointments and court appearances related to the identity theft case. 6 months after the assault, I received a letter from Frank. My first instinct was to throw it away unopened, but Lisa encouraged me to read it, saying it might provide closure. You do not have to respond, she advised. But sometimes, hearing what the other person has to say can help you process your feelings. The letter was brief, a stilted apology that rang hollow and self-serving. Frank claimed that he had been under immense stress and that he never meant to hurt me. There was no acknowledgement of the identity theft, no genuine remorse for the trauma he had caused. I showed the letter to Lisa at our next session. What do you think she asked after reading it? I think he is sorry he got caught, not sorry for what he did, I replied. And I think I do not need his apology to heal. As my first year of recovery progressed, I found unexpected strength in sharing my story. A support group for survivors of family violence became another pillar of my healing journey. Listening to others who had experienced similar betrayals and violence helped me feel less alone, and in time I began to offer guidance to newer members of the group. You were so brave to press charges, one young woman told me after I shared my story. My brother abused me for years, and my parents always made excuses for him. I wish I had had your courage. It was not courage, I said, thinking back to those dark days after the assault. It was survival. And you survived too. That makes you just as brave. The group leader, Maria, eventually asked if I would be willing to speak at a community awareness event about financial abuse and family violence. The thought of speaking publicly about my experience was terrifying, but I agreed, feeling that if my story could help even one person avoid a similar situation, it would be worth it. The day of the event, I stood at the podium, looking out at a room full of strangers, my hands trembling slightly as I adjusted the microphone. But as I began to speak, my voice grew stronger. My name is Jerry, and a year ago my stepfather beat me because I refused to co-sign a predatory loan that would have ruined me financially. My mother stood by and told me I deserved it. Today, I want to talk about how financial abuse often precedes physical violence and how important it is to recognize the warning signs. After the event, several people approached me sharing their own stories or asking for advice about situations they were concerned about. I connected them with resources and support groups, feeling for the first time that something positive had come from my traumatic experience. As the second year after the assault began, I found myself thinking less about what I had lost and more about what I had gained: a deeper understanding of my own strength, a closer relationship with my brother, and a network of supportive friends who had stood by me through the darkest time of my life. Michael and I began a new tradition of Sunday brunches, a time to check in with each other and maintain the bond that had grown even stronger during my recovery. During one such brunch, he shared news that he had heard through Aunt Patricia. "Mom is moving to Florida," he said carefully, watching my reaction. "Uncle David helped her find an apartment near his winter home." I nodded, surprised by how little the news affected me. "Is she doing okay?" "Patricia says she is still struggling financially. Frank apparently had even more debt than we knew about, but she is getting by. She asks about you sometimes." "But not enough to call me herself," I noted, without the bitterness that would have colored such a statement a year earlier. Michael shrugged. "That is on her, not you. You did nothing wrong." Those words, "you did nothing wrong," had become a mantra during my therapy sessions. For months, I had wrestled with guilt and self-doubt, wondering if I could have handled the situation differently, if I could have somehow prevented the violence and preserved my relationship with my mother. Lisa had patiently helped me see that the responsibility lay with Frank, who chose violence, and with my mother, who chose to enable and defend him. "I know," I said, and for perhaps the first time I truly believed it. The healing process was not linear. There were still bad days, still nightmares and moments of anxiety, but they became less frequent, less overwhelming. I learned to recognize triggers and developed strategies to cope with them. I built a life that felt secure and meaningful, despite the absences that sometimes ached like phantom limbs. 3 years after the assault, I received a promotion at work and moved to a new apartment in a different part of the city. The move felt symbolic, a fresh start in a space that held no memories of the past trauma. I adopted a rescue dog, a gentle golden retriever mix named Sunshine, whose presence in my home brought comfort and joy. Frank was released from prison after serving 3 years of his 5-year sentence. Detective Thompson called to inform me, offering to help me renew the restraining order that had been part of his sentencing. "Do you think he would try to contact me?" I asked, surprised by how calm I felt at the news of his release. "I cannot say for certain," Detective Thompson replied. "But in my experience, it is better to be safe than sorry." I renewed the restraining order, but Frank never attempted to contact me. Through Aunt Patricia's occasional updates, I learned that he had moved to another state and that my mother had chosen not to reconcile with him after his release. It was a small vindication, but I took no pleasure in it. The damage had been done long ago. Looking back on the 4 years since that terrible day, I can see how far I have come. The physical scars have faded, and while the emotional ones remain, they no longer define me. I have built a life filled with purpose and genuine connections, a life that would not have been possible if I had given in to Frank's demands and signed those loan papers. The most important lesson I learned through all of this is that true family supports you, not endangers you. Blood relationships do not give anyone the right to harm you or to demand that you harm yourself for their benefit. Sometimes the family we choose, the friends who stand by us in our darkest moments, are more truly family than those we are born to. I still have moments when I miss my mother, the mother she was before Frank, before she chose his welfare over my safety. But I have made peace with the reality that I cannot change her choices, only my own. And I choose to move forward, to live fully and honestly, to set boundaries that protect my physical, emotional, and financial well-being. If you are watching this and find yourself in a situation where family members are pressuring you to make financial decisions that feel wrong, trust your instincts. Seek outside advice. Remember that love should never come with the price tag of your own security or safety. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision that put you at odds with family members? Share your experiences in the comments below. And please like and subscribe to support others sharing their stories of survival and healing. Remember, your well-being matters, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is say no to those who would harm you, even when they claim to love you. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you strength and peace on your own journey.